Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Thursday night program in virtual format tonight. Los Angeles-based artist Kristin Leachman. On the screen, you can see a gallery view of what our exhibition currently looks like. And on the far wall, second from the right, is Kristin's painting Xylem 12. The museum only acquired it for the permanent collection last year. So we're so pleased to be able to exhibit it. I want to tell you a little bit about Kristin. You can read her whole bio on our website, but she received her BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA in production design from the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. So a slightly unusual background for an artist. Kristin, you also worked in a film studio in Los Angeles for many years first. What I'm curious to know is how the transition happened, or the full transition from working in the film industry to working in your studio where you join us from today.
Hi, Marinta. Yes, thank you for having me. I was working actually at Raleigh Studios for a while on Melrose and Hollywood, and New Space Gallery was across the street. And I had recently won a fellowship, and I was starting to rent a studio downtown in the produce market. And during lunchtime, I would go over to New Space and look at shows and talk to Joni Gordon. And we developed a really nice friendship. And she pretty much just exhibited Los Angeles art, contemporary art, but she also did a lot of work in California art resale. So in her back room was a mini museum of the history of California art. So she was one of my really first and best teachers in this whole area. So it's an honor to be in this space and to be hanging with all of these incredible painters.
And it's interesting, Kristin, when you and I started talking earlier, and you saw the new context of your painting, it just very quickly surfaced how deep the story and the influence with all these people are. We see a painting of Helen Lundeberg right at the left of this photo. We have some more photos of the gallery. And also, I was so happy to hear that Laguna Art Museum has a special place in your development as an artist, especially an exhibition that you came to see in the mid-90s as you were still working in the film studio, or right at that time. Do you want to tell us about that visit to Laguna Art Museum?
Yes, the mid-90s had three pivotal shows in Los Angeles and Laguna. Yours was the incredible, I still have the catalog, John McLaughlin, Western Modernism, Eastern Thought. And I still look at this book regularly. I still love him. He's hanging in the middle of the space with the yellow stripes. I really consider him, for me, the grandfather of Los Angeles contemporary art, and Helen, the grandmother, for me, right, for my practice. She was someone I was also looking at. There was a few galleries showing her work, and she was alive. I actually phoned her because somebody told me, she lived in LA still, and I got her number from her dealer, and she was quite sick, but we had a lovely conversation, and she was working right up until the end, as was John McLaughlin. So, they've been completely inspiring to me. And then I'd say the other two big shows was the Agnes Pelton at Pepperdine, Poet of Nature. Michael Zakian put on that show. That was 25 years ago. And now it's come back around. There's a retrospective at Palm Springs Museum currently. And that was an absolute knockout show for me. And then the Arm & Hammer had this incredible show, Pacific Dreams, Currents and Surrealism and Fantasy in California Art. So those all were things that I saw within a year of each other, and pretty much solidified my commitment to, involving myself in the California art world.
Wonderful, thank you. Why don't we look at another slide of what the big gallery in the museum, the Steel Gallery, looks like right now. There are two more paintings. On the right is a painting of Lee Mulliken, and we'll look a little bit more closely at Kristin's work in a second. But there are just at first glance, there are so many similarities with the way Mulliken paint and what Xylem 12 looks like, Kristin. And you have a great story about a connection to Lee Mulliken that's even from a little bit earlier. You were still in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so I think I had 2 months left before I graduated, and I was one of the artists who hosted visiting painters and to come and lecture. And so I picked up Lee's son at the train station, Matt Mulliken, and we had lunch and spent the afternoon together, and I took him to his lecture, and I was in the middle of deciding if I wanted to go in this MFA program in painting or move to Los Angeles and start there. And he really encouraged me to go to LA. He said, "Oh, you have to go. My parents are great painters, and you have to meet them. And you know, it's an incredible town." And so I listened to him. And it's nice to be, and of course, when I got here I started seeing the Lee Mulliken paintings, that was incredibly exciting for me. So, and then of course on the left is Helen's husband, Lorser Feidelson. I live in Pasadena, and he was a teacher at the Pasadena, the Stickney Art School, and Helen was his pupil. And they ended up getting married, and they helped found the post-surrealist movement, which is one of my favorite periods in California art as well.
Great, it's wonderful to just see again how everything is connected. We have another slide of the Steel Gallery at the moment.
Right, and so this is Gordon Onslow Ford on the left, and Craig Kaufman, who is famous in the Ferris Gallery on the right. And Gordon Onslow Ford and Lee, I think, are still artists I look to. They were really interested in the inner landscape, the inner and outer worlds. Indigenous art was really inspiring to them, the ancestors, the natural spirits, forces, cosmic reality, Zen and calligraphy, and just this incredible objects that they made. I mean, they're so beautifully put together in terms of mark making, and have really inspired me.
And I believe we have one more slide of the Steel Gallery.
Yes.
There we go. Or maybe yet another one. This is facing out, just to give our viewers an idea. This is almost standing in front of Kristin's painting, facing the other way.
Right, and then you can see in the corner, there's Judy on the right, Judy Chicago. She was also an early influence, had been painting in Pasadena in the late 60s, did the Women's House, a lot of incredible, groundbreaking feminist work. I was also looking at that. So as we move along, you can see how all of these sort of merge together. And there's Chaz Burkess. He was, he called himself a Chicano graffiti artist, and he's still alive, and he painted in the 60s. When he was young, he started in the LA riverbeds. So it's a beautiful juxtaposition with John McLaughlin's painting, a man who had been in both world wars and started painting in his late 40s, and right down the street from you in Dana Point. So there's a Helen and a Tony Delap. Those are beautiful.
And I'm so glad. I'm so glad to have women artists represented there. Women artists obviously had a huge influence on your work, and we'll see that as we delve a little bit into your earlier work also. I wonder if you can give our viewers. I got to know Kristin in 2016 with the Xylem series, but I asked Kristin to share with us some of her earlier work and maybe just some of her influences.
Yeah, so these paintings I started, and they were all based on a really popular size that John McLaughlin used, the 48 by 60. And I was actually building my own panels, and I'd gone to your show, and I came home and I took the measurements and started to do this whole series. And so then it was, you know, mixing with, you can see, if you see the influence of Agnes Pelton, absolutely. They were all based on California landscapes. You know, even I remember when I was painting this one, where flower gradation is in the color. I was working on them sort of like you read a book or write a diary, left to right, a few braids a day. You know, a lot of overpainting and layering and, you know, creating sort of this transcendental forest experience. So they move along, they're grabbing forest light. And this one I did on the 210, based on a day on the 210 freeway, the glaring light through the windshield and the landscape on either side. I did a
So
lot
just to make sure that our viewers know, what is the medium of these, Kristin?
They're all, well, this is actually graphite and pencil, but the previous ones are, you know, all oil on birch panel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
definitely also a precursor to what you ended up doing. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so these are all graphite and on paper.
Beautiful.
Again, looking through trees, light through trees. This is, I made up on the Angeles Crest, looking down into the whole valley. So there's always this sort of abstract part and figurative part, and they're sort of crossing. So here we go. And you and I were talking about this one in terms of McCracken, and they were about the same height. They were about 6 feet. They hung about 2 inches from the floor. They were on wood panel and oil paint. They're all oil paint, and they're, you know, cracked doorways into women's inner worlds. I grew up in Virginia. I was not around a lot of contemporary art. I was around a lot of craft. And so I think when I was starting out, I saw it in a lot of American realism work, but I did not see kind of a lot of rural iconography entering the mainstream contemporary world. So I liked putting that there. I liked putting these specific forms that were kind of a little more, we were a little more accustomed to. And then I just liked having that kind of female energy of crochet, of weaving. In all of them. But you can tell I really love, you know, making beautiful objects, and the paint handling and the depth and, you know, all of it. So it's, you know, I just love the act of painting, and these really helped me explore that. And they were a great to the rigor of painting the Xylem.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought we would start with talking about the Xylem in terms of early California landscape painting. You know, and Franz Bischoff is in your collection. This he did in the Arroyo, right near where I live and where the painting in your collection was made. So I thought we could sort of tie all of these in So you had a context. And this is Marion Wachtel, a plein air painter. It's watercolor. She did it right up the hill from where I live. And she painted it in watercolor because her husband did not want her to paint in oil until after his death. And so when he died, she did start painting in oil. This is also up the hill looking out, probably Altadena in the background, at the foothills of the San Gabriels. She was an incredible painter, especially of eucalyptus trees. And someone I've always liked as I've moved along. This was yesterday in the Arroyo, so just sort of you can see that there's now bridges, there's modern life, but they have really worked hard to keep this, you know, a native natural park. There's the tree. So we were talking too about how, you know, I was originally going to have 6 paintings in the show with you, and Malcolm was like, oh, I'd like 8. And I didn't have time. They were all based in different forests around California. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to do this one. You know, I'm going to go down to the Arroyo and work there. So this was a great tree that I worked with.
And the Xylem series that was, so, excuse me, Kristin, the Xylem series that was on view at Laguna Art Museum in 2016 actually coincided with an annual festival that we have called Art and Nature. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just the general inspiration of nature and your approach to what role nature specifically plays in your art. I think you are one of the artists that I've seen that really uses, or in this series specifically, used a very microscopic view on nature.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because it's, you know, I've been using the actual physical landscape to make the landscape paintings. So that's been a nice way to kind of enter into it all from a painting standpoint. But again, as I said, I didn't grow up really going to museums. I did grow up in, you know, our home was right in front of the woods. So spent a lot of time there. I was really lucky to have a mother who has an amazing knowledge of the natural world. And she's all self-taught, but I'd put her next to any great college professor in terms of the depth of her information. So not only did I love going and looking at it all, but I, thanks to her, knew what I was looking at, right? Which just made it a lot more rich. And even with my current project, she and my stepfather are still people I consult regularly because they're such incredible scientists. And she was also great at bird identification, which I think is, you know, involves muscles of, you know, deep sight, deep vision to be able to quickly, while they're moving, identify color and form. And that's a real gift. So, you know, just having all of that around, how it affects how you see and the muscles that you work in terms of how you approach everything you look at. So this painting, for instance,
and maybe
is interesting because there's something within them that I'm connecting to, as a friend of mine calls them arbor glyphs. You know, this kind of pictograph. And in this one, I was immediately drawn to this kind of, if you can see this bison shape, and it's almost like the bison on a cave painting. Its head is on the far right, like down, and its back is arched and up and around. But, you know, again, other people might see that completely attracted to me just based on Native American folklore. You know, the bison is the sort of, and it's also white, a white bison, this kind of prophecy of hope. And then it also turns into a deer head. So there's that kind of gentleness of the deer. And then you have this whole patterning, which I'm really interested in. And the patterning also kind of reflects back to Native American women basketry. They lived in the Arroyo for a time. This was all, you know, Quiche tribal area. So anyway, there's all of that. It's kind of layered of these layers of meaning that are in all of these paintings for me.
And then the source material that you use for these, xylem is an actual biological term. Would you just like to give our viewers a sense of what's actually the source for these for those patterns that come about?
Yeah, so this image is of the San Gabriel Mountains, and you can see a lot of it is oak trees. And the oak, the California live coastal oak, xylem, which is the water conducting tissue under the bark that takes the water from the roots to the canopy, presents itself in this psychedelic form only in oaks in California. Now, people have seen a little bit of it here and there, but it's nothing like it is here. And so the different plant pathologists and people I've spoken to all say, oh no, this is really interesting. And then subsequently, when I've been working on this, I do talk to scientists periodically. And one of them at USC said, you're the only person doing comparative tree patterning research in the state. And I'm not, you know, that is not conscious. I'm a painter, right? I'm not a scientist. But that is one of the sort of byproducts that's come from this project. So
Wonderful.
here's how it really began. It began up in the San Gabriels, and it began with making gouache drawings and on this handmade paper. So I did a lot of these, and just sort of seeing if I wanted to make them in oil, not quite sure, and just kind of exploring all of that.
Do you have a schedule of your day? These are the result is so methodical, and I can imagine the process is very methodical. What does a typical day look like for you if you have a typical day of painting?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, there's definitely this research part of my practice where I'm out in nature. And that involves some photography, a lot of sketching, and just a lot of time. And, you know, sometimes it's fruitful, and sometimes it's just, you know, a couple of days of nice walking. So all of it is different. I am always going off. It's sort of like an archaeological dig. You know, I'm going out and I'm looking for information. And that could be of use in the studio. And so then when the studio practice is just, it's very regimented. You know, I'm a mom. I start when school starts and I finish when school ends. And that's what I do. And that's been my practice and will be for one more year until he goes to college. So, you know, but I do keep real regular hours and usually work one day a weekend.
Has the pandemic changed anything? Probably not much. Apart from all the obvious challenges that all of us have had. Has it had an influence on your practice?
I think the pandemic has been actually fine for me. There has been very little distraction. So there's less pulling you away from art making. I think I've gotten a lot done. So it's been stressful in other ways. But in terms of actual making, I've been pretty prolific this year.
Wonderful. And I'm definitely going to, I would love to hear a little bit about what you're working on right now. But just before we get there, I just want to say an insight for myself is how perfectly this Xylem series fits within our permanent collection. And yeah, these were still some of the gouache on paper, I believe.
Right. So this was one that was in your show. And this was a pretty like sort of middle of the series piece. It came from a canyon not far from here. And it was, these took probably a good 6 to 8 months to make. Oh,
Gosh.
sorry. And there's, I guess, right before they went to Laguna, there they are in my studio.
And this is wonderful to get really a sense of the scale of these.
Yes, the scale and how they all sort of fit together.
And they were eventually exhibited on the lower level of the museum, and it was just perfection. Here we can see it. This was the exhibition in late 2016.
Well, I have to say that whole experience of showing with you was so fantastic, because just putting it in context of all the other artists that are also working with nature, I mean, you can get pretty isolated in your own project, and that was wonderful. It was wonderful to be there the year before and see Lita's show, and I just, Philip K. Smith was great, and the work that he did on your beach, and just to be a part of that whole, history of those art nature shows. I loved it so much. I love too that the museum is in nature. It is on a beach. I'll never forget the first time I came. I remember looking at the Thomas Guide and thinking, oh, I can swim and see art, right? And I put my bathing suit in the car, and I remember seeing the John McLaughlin show and then jumping in the water. I mean, you're these two activities that completely raise your spirits and vibration, right? Art and nature. So to be able to do them all within an hour of each other is beautiful.
I think the Xylem series led to some other paintings as part of a residency, Kristin.
Yeah, so after Laguna, I was an artist in residence at Yosemite National Park, and they don't have the formal government artist residency, but they had a cabin that was going to be torn down. Yosemite Conservancy had me come because there's this whole grove of black oaks that is unfortunately slowly dying. It's very endangered, and so I went there. Once, even in a snowstorm, I was stuck in the valley with no power, and they had closed the park. So that was an incredible experience, to be in there covered in snow and alone. It was just me and some park rangers and staff. So they were lovely to me, and I really did have the whole experience to myself for about 2 whole days. And then they let in a few people, each day they would let in a few, a limited amounts. So, but it was still really beautiful. And this is one of the big paintings I made from that experience. And you can see how the black oak xylem almost, it's tighter, it's almost melted. And that's because the trees were all exposed to low-grade burns done by the different Indian tribes that were based in the valley and tended the landscape with fire. The John Muir journals, he's describing the valley. It's all because the Miwoks and other tribes were actually tending it all the time. Regular burns, they were using all the acorns for food, and completely landscaping it. It was stunning. And this is something California hopefully will reintroduce. I think with populations the way they are in various areas, it's very hard to do low-grade burns, but they really do help prevent these giant hot fires that come from so much falling in the understory, where it just gets so thick and just burns out of control. So stay tuned. Let's hope that happens. I know they're working on it. Here's another painting from a black oak. And then sort of tying this back into the making of the painting in the steel gallery. I work on them flat, and I also work on them on the wall. So it's a combination of back and forth, maybe 2 days flat, 2 days up, and then back and forth, depending on where in the panel I'm working. And then back to the gallery. So hopefully from all of this, you can start seeing connections with some of the paintings there. This is, you know, a dream to be there. You know, on the far middle, on the far left wall with the red, that's Florence Arnold. She was also really inspired by John McLaughlin and was a music teacher in Fullerton. And then at 50, started painting full time, but she was a contemporary of McLaughlin. And I love that she's in there. And then of course, John Altoon on the other side of my painting is somebody, you know, I've always loved, sort of the heart of the Ferris Gallery group, and a wild, naughty imagination. I've always loved his work. So it's so nice to be hanging next to him.
And this is also a good time for me, Kristin, to ask you to give us a sense of what you're working on at the moment.
Yes, so right now I've started to expand the project that I did for Laguna, and the project's called 50 Forests. I'm hopefully going to be going to forests in all 50 states. So I started working to lead up to it. I started working with a lot of eucalyptus trees, boar beetle patterning. These were all done in California, all in 2019. And that led to an opportunity to go to a longleaf pine forest in South Georgia. And the longleaf pine is a very special tree, and the forest, you know, originally in the 1700s took up something like 70 million acres from Southern Virginia all the way to East Texas. And so I had the opportunity to go here. I'm putting together a show for the Georgia Museum of Art. It'll be next summer. But this is a very special old growth stand. These trees, now the forest area is only 3 million. This is one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world, second to the tropical rainforests. And this particular place was an old plantation. It was just burned. We were talking about that previously. The understory is very low. It was originally burned by the Lower Creek tribe, whose home this was originally. And they did it for practical reasons, as well as the health of the trees, so that they could run through the woods and move around and hunt. And now it's really done for preservation purposes. But it was magical to be there. There's a whole history of the turpentine business. These trees were tapped for turpentine and resin, and their trunks were used for shipbuilding early on. And even like a week before I got there, the contractors who were repairing Notre Dame Cathedral were calling the forester to see if there was any old growth that he would be willing to sell for some of the cathedral repairs. So it's a very, very desirable wood, very strong, and an incredible amount of wildlife that are there. So for me, these paintings are coming out of that experience, and they're behind me in the in the headshot of me in the corner of the screen. And there's another one, and I'll be doing 3 big ones and a lot of sort of more medium size pieces for the show.
They are
But
gorgeous.
it's been exciting. I've loved doing it. I've loved just, you know, the difference between, you know, the whole inspiring experience of walking through California forests versus a completely different part of the country has been exciting and kind of revigorating to my practice. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that feels throughout different states as I move along. But it all started with you, Marinta.
These are absolutely gorgeous. Oh, wonderful. Kristin, thank you so much. We are so honored to have you as part of our permanent collection, and we are so pleased to have you as a friend of the museum. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Marinta. And thanks to the Laguna Art Museum. I think you're some of the nicest people in the art world. And so it is an honor always to work with you and to show with you. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight.